Who bought you this dress?
The question cut through the penthouse like a death sentence, and Cassidy froze, because Hae-sung Park never raised his voice nor never lost control. But now Seoul's most dangerous man stood before her, demanding an answer, and her response would determine whether someone lived or disappeared by morning. Welcome to the channel, lovelies. Please like and subscribe. The elevator doors slid open with a whisper, revealing the kind of penthouse that existed only in fantasies. Cassidy Michael stepped out, her heels clicking against the stone, and immediately felt the weight of a mistake she couldn't name. The red dress seemed like a good idea this morning. Elegant, sophisticated, nothing too revealing. But now, standing in Hae-sung Park's private domain, she felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the fabric clinging to her curves. The penthouse was silent, too silent. She smoothed her hands over her hips, suddenly hyper-aware of how different this was from her usual uniform. The modest black dress with its high neckline and knee-length hem that had been her armor for 8 months. 8 months of arriving on time, keeping her head down, doing her job with invisible efficiency. Why had she worn this tonight? Cassidy. His voice came from the shadows near the floor-to-ceiling windows, low and controlled, but underneath it ran something she'd never heard before. Something dangerous. She turned, her breath catching in her throat. Hae-sung stood backlit by the city, his silhouette sharp and predatory. Even from across the room, she could see the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands had curled into fists at his sides. He stepped forward into the light, and Cassidy's stomach dropped. His eyes were black with something she couldn't identify, but it made every instinct scream at her to run. Those eyes traveled down her body with agonizing slowness, taking in the red silk, the way it hugged her waist, the neckline that suddenly felt too low. When his gaze finally returned to her face, the muscle in his jaw was ticking like a time bomb. "Who got you that dress?" The question hit her like a slap. Not, "You look nice." Not, "Is this new?" The accusation in those 5 words was unmistakable, and Cassidy's mind raced to understand what she'd done wrong. The dress had appeared on her doorstep 3 days ago, wrapped in expensive paper with no card, no explanation. She'd assumed it was from her sister, maybe an early birthday gift. But the way Hae-sung was looking at her now made her wonder if she should have thrown it away. It was a gift, she said carefully, watching his face for clues. I don't know who. From whom? Not a question. A command. The temperature in the room plummeted, and Cassidy suddenly remembered exactly who she was dealing with. Hae-sung Park wasn't just a wealthy businessman with a penthouse in Gangnam. He wasn't just her employer. He was the most feared man in Seoul. The realization hit her fresh, despite 8 months of working in his world. She'd grown comfortable, she realized, dangerously comfortable. Had forgotten the whispers that followed him, the way his associates moved around him like he was made of lightning, drawn to his power but terrified of touching it. Hae-sung Park controlled an empire from the shadows. Korean mafia, not the romanticized version from dramas, but the real thing. The kind that made people disappear. The kind that owned politicians and police officers. The kind that had ruled the Gangnam district for 3 generations. His family name was spoken in hushed tones. His reputation was untouchable, and right now, that legendary control was visibly fracturing. I don't know, Cassidy said, keeping her voice steady through sheer will. There was no card. I thought maybe my sister sent it, but I haven't asked her yet. You're wearing a gift from an unknown sender. His voice was soft now, which somehow made it worse. To my home, without verifying its source. The criticism stung, partly because he was right, it had been foolish. But mostly because of the barely restrained fury beneath his words, fury that felt personal in a way that made no sense. I apologize, Mr. Park. It won't happen again. No, he said, still not moving from his position near the window. It won't. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating, Cassidy wanted to ask what she'd done to deserve this treatment, wanted to demand an explanation for the storm in his eyes. But 8 months of working for Hae-sung had taught her when to push and when to retreat. This was definitely a retreat moment. "I'll go change into my uniform," she offered quietly. "No." The word cracked like a whip. "You'll wear what you came in." "But understand this, Cassidy. In my world, gifts are never innocent. Someone wanted you in that dress. Someone wanted you to look." He stopped himself, jaw clenching. "Just do your job." He turned away, dismissing her, but she could see his reflection in the window, could see the rigid line of his spine, the way his hands remained fisted, the muscles still ticking in his jaw. Something had changed tonight. Something fundamental and terrifying. Cassidy moved through the penthouse in a daze, setting up for the evening's business. She'd barely begun when Jung-ho, Hae-sung's right-hand man, appeared at her elbow. He was younger than Hae-sung, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes and an easy smile that never quite reached them. "New dress?" he asked casually, but there was a warning in his tone. It was a gift. Jung-ho glanced toward where Hae-sung had disappeared into his study. "Word of advice? The boss doesn't like unknowns, especially ones that involve his staff." He paused, then lowered his voice. "There are rules in this house, Cassidy. You've been good about following them so far. Don't stop now." "I know the rules," she said, a little defensively. She'd been given the lecture her first day. Never ask about his business. Never fail at your duties. Never let your personal life interfere. "Do you?" Jung-ho's expression turned serious. "Because there's one rule that doesn't get spoken. Don't get too close. Don't let him get too close. He ruins everything he touches. Not because he wants to, but because that's what men like him do. That's what this life does." Before Cassidy could respond, voices echoed from the entrance. Hae-sung's associates were arriving, 6 men in expensive suits, all wearing the same careful expression. They greeted their boss with respectful bows. But Cassidy noticed how they gave him space, how they watched him from the corners of their eyes. Even his own men were afraid of him. The evening crawled by. Cassidy served drinks, cleared plates, made herself invisible as Hae-sung conducted his business in rapid Korean. She understood enough to know they were discussing territory, payments, someone who'd broken an agreement. The conversation was coded, careful, but the threat underneath was crystal clear. Cross Hae-sung Park, and you cease to exist. And through it all, she felt his eyes on her, constantly, tracking her movements around the room, watching when she bent to retrieve a dropped napkin, following her every time she entered or exited. His jaw remained clenched, his shoulders rigid, and he barely participated in the conversation. He was too busy watching her. The associates noticed. She saw them exchange glances, saw Jung-ho shake his head in warning when one of them opened his mouth to comment. The attention felt like a physical weight, pressing down on her until she wanted to scream. What had she done? What had changed? By the time the last associate left, Cassidy's nerves were shredded. She began cleaning up, desperate to finish and escape. Hae-sung had disappeared into his study without a word, and she told herself she was relieved. She was lying. Jung-ho caught her at the elevator. "Cassidy, that warning I gave you earlier, I meant it. Whatever's happening between you two, stop it before it starts. For your own sake." "Nothing's happening," she protested. "He's my employer. That's all." The look Jung-ho gave her was almost pitying. "Keep telling yourself that. Maybe you'll believe it before it's too late." The elevator doors closed on his words and Cassidy sagged against the wall. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Did you like the dress? You looked beautiful. M." Her blood went cold. Jake, her ex-boyfriend of 2 years ago, the one who'd walked away claiming he needed to find himself. How had he gotten her new number? How had he known where she lived? How had he known she'd worn the dress tonight? The questions chased her all the way home, mixing with the memory of Hae-sung's black eyes and Young-ho's warning. She fell asleep uneasy, with the feeling that she'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple misunderstanding. She had no idea how right she was. 2 weeks passed. The red dress was never mentioned again. But something had fundamentally shifted in the penthouse. Cassidy felt it in every interaction, every loaded silence, every moment Hae-sung's gaze followed her across the room. He was watching her, always watching. But more than that, he was learning. Her. It started small. Her coffee appeared every morning prepared exactly how she liked it. 1 sugar, splash of cream, in the blue mug she always chose. When she mentioned in passing that the penthouse felt cold, the temperature adjusted by precisely 3 degrees. Her car, which she'd always parked in the public garage 2 blocks away, suddenly had a reserved spot in Hae-sung's private garage, the one with 24-hour security and cameras covering every angle. Meeting times shifted without explanation. She noticed that she was never in the building alone after 10 p.m. anymore. Deliveries she'd once accepted at the back entrance were now screened by security first. Ha-sung never acknowledged any of it, never explained. But the protection wrapped around her like invisible armor, and Cassidy didn't know whether to feel grateful or terrified. The answer came during one of Hae-sung's private gatherings. These were smaller than his business meetings. A dozen of his most trusted associates, gathering to discuss matters that required absolute discretion. Cassidy had served at 5 of them without incident. She knew how to be invisible, how to refill drinks and remove plates without drawing attention. But tonight, one of the men was drunk. He was younger than the others, maybe mid-30s, with expensive cologne and wandering eyes. Cassidy had noticed him watching her throughout the evening, his gaze getting bolder with each drink. She'd dealt with unwanted attention before, knew how to deflect, how to stay professional, how to make herself forgettable. She didn't expect him to follow her into the kitchen. "You're prettier than the last girl," he said, blocking the doorway. His words slurred together, but there was something calculated in his eyes, something that made her skin crawl. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Excuse me, sir. I need to return to—" His hand shot out, closing around her wrist with bruising force. "I asked you a question." Fear spiked through her chest. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too isolated. Cassidy opened her mouth to call for help, but the man's grip tightened. "Don't make a scene," he warned. "You know who I am. I'm important. And you're just—" He never finished the sentence. 1 second he was there, hand locked around her wrist, breath hot and alcohol-soaked in her face. The next second, he was stumbling backward, released by a force Cassidy hadn't seen. She blinked, disoriented, and found Hae-sung standing between them. He hadn't made a sound, hadn't announced his presence, but the temperature in the kitchen had dropped so dramatically that Cassidy could see her breath. "Get out!" Hae-sung's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The drunk man's face drained of color, sobriety hitting him like cold water. "Ha-sung, I didn't mean— I was just talking to her. Out. Young-ho will escort you." There was no room for negotiation, no possibility of argument. The man fled, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste to escape. Jung-ho appeared in the doorway, took one look at Hae-sung's face, and followed without a word. Silence filled the kitchen. Cassidy stood frozen, her wrist still tingling where the man had grabbed her. She waited for Hae-sung to ask if she was all right, to acknowledge what had just happened. Instead, he said, "Return to your duties," and walked away. But his hands were shaking. She'd seen it in the split second before he'd fisted them. Fine tremors that suggested barely controlled violence. The gathering ended within 20 minutes. The associates filed out with unusual haste, avoiding Cassidy's eyes, speaking in hushed tones. She cleaned in silence, her mind reeling, trying to process what had happened. 3 days later, Young-ho mentioned casually that Lee, the drunk associate, wouldn't be attending any more gatherings. "He's been relocated," he said, his tone implying this was completely normal. "To Busan, permanently." Cassidy's hands stilled on the documents she was organizing. "What do you mean, relocated?" Young-ho's expression remained neutral, but there was something knowing in his eyes. "He forgot the rules? Made the boss's list of people who don't exist in Seoul anymore." He paused. "You should feel honored. Mr. Park doesn't usually handle staff matters personally." After he left, Cassidy stood alone in the office, trying to understand what she was feeling. Fear, gratitude, something else entirely. Hae-sung had destroyed a man's entire life in Seoul because of what? A drunken advance, an unwanted touch, because of her? The thought should have terrified her. Instead, something warm and dangerous unfurled in her chest. And she realized with growing unease that she was starting to see past the monster everyone else feared. The protection continued, more obvious now that she was looking for it. Ha-sung remembered impossible details. The name of her sister's dog, which vendor she preferred for fresh flowers, that she was allergic to shellfish. When she mentioned being tired one afternoon, her workload mysteriously lightened the next day. When she skipped lunch, food appeared from her favorite restaurant, a place she'd mentioned visiting once but 3 months ago. He never acknowledged any of it, never explained, but his gaze followed her constantly, and Cassidy found herself testing the boundaries, pushing to see what he would do. Every test was answered, every need anticipated. And through it all, Hae-sung maintained his careful distance, that mask of control never slipping, until the night Cassidy found him vulnerable. She'd stayed late to finish organizing his study, later than she'd intended. It was past 3 a.m. when she finally put away the last file, her eyes burning with exhaustion. She should go home. She would go home. But first, she needed water. The penthouse was silent as she moved through the darkness, navigating by the glow of the city outside. She rounded the corner to the sitting area and froze. Hae-sung sat in his reading chair, still fully dressed in his suit, head tilted back against the leather. His eyes were closed, dark circles visible even in the dim light. And for the first time since she'd met him, he looked human, exhausted, almost fragile. The mask was gone. Cassidy knew she should leave, knew that seeing him like this, unguarded, vulnerable, real, was dangerous. But her feet carried her to the kitchen anyway, and before she could question the impulse, she was preparing tea. The same blend he drank every night, steeped for exactly 4 minutes the way he preferred. She brought it to him silently, setting the cup on the side table within reach. His eyes opened, and for half a second, just half a second, she saw past every wall he'd ever built. She saw loneliness, bone deep and absolute. Then the mask slammed back into place so fast she wondered if she'd imagined it. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "I was just leaving." Cassidy turned to go, but something made her reach back to adjust the cup, worried it was too close to the edge. Her fingers brushed his as he reached for it at the same moment, barely a second of contact, skin against skin. Hae-sung jerked away like she'd burned him. The cup rattled against the saucer, tea sloshing dangerously close to the rim. He stood abruptly, putting 5 feet of distance between them in an instant. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by something wild and barely controlled. His chest heaved like he'd been running, and his hands curled into fists at his sides. "Go home, Cassidy." She should move, should apologize, should do something. But she stood frozen, staring at him, trying to understand the storm in his eyes. "Leave. Now." The command broke through her paralysis. Cassidy fled, grabbing her things and practically running to the elevator. Her hands shook as she pressed the button, and she couldn't shake the image of his face in that moment, not angry, not disgusted, but desperate. Like he was holding himself back from something by sheer force of will. The doors closed, and Cassidy sagged against the wall, her heart pounding. She pressed her fingers to her lips, remembering the spark of contact, the way her skin still tingled where they'd touched. This was dangerous. Whatever was happening between them was dangerous. But she couldn't make herself regret staying late. Couldn't make herself regret bringing him tea. Couldn't make herself regret wanting to do it again. The flowers arrived on a Tuesday morning, a massive arrangement of white roses and lilies that dominated the penthouse's entrance. Cassidy stared at them in confusion, searching for a card among the blooms. When she found it, her stomach dropped. "For my Cassie. Let's talk." M. Jake. She hadn't heard from her ex-boyfriend in 2 years. Not since he'd walked out claiming he needed to find himself, leaving her heartbroken and questioning everything about their relationship. 2 years of healing, of rebuilding, of convincing herself she was better off without him. First the dress, and now this. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, except it wasn't unknown anymore. "Did you get the flowers? I know it's been a long time. I was an idiot, Cassie. The biggest idiot in the world. I've spent 2 years regretting walking away from the best thing in my life. Please, just give me a chance to explain. Coffee? Just to talk?" Cassidy read the message 3 times, emotions warring in her chest. Anger. How dare he show up now after 2 years of silence? Curiosity. What could he possibly say that would excuse what he'd done? And underneath it all, a traitorous flutter of something she didn't want to name. What if he really had changed? What if people could grow and fix their mistakes? Before she could second-guess herself, she typed back, "Saturday, 2 p.m. The cafe on Gangnam. Just to talk." His response was immediate. "Thank you, you won't regret this. I promise." She should delete the messages, should throw away the flowers, should remember all the reasons she'd spent 2 years getting over Jake instead. She found herself staring at the white roses, wondering if closure was really possible, or if she was about to make a terrible mistake. "Delivery for you!" Cassidy jumped, spinning to find Young-ho in the doorway. His eyebrows rose as he took in the flowers, and something flickered across his face. Concern, maybe, or warning. "Just something personal," she said quickly. Expensive gesture for something personal. His gaze sharpened. "New boyfriend? Ex-boyfriend. It's complicated." Jung-ho's expression shifted into something that definitely looked like concern now. "Does the boss know? Why would Mr. Park care about my personal life?" The look he gave her suggested she was being deliberately naive, but he just shook his head. "Right. Of course. None of my business." He paused at the door. "Just maybe mention it before he finds out another way. He really doesn't like surprises." After he left, Cassidy stood alone with the flowers, unease creeping up her spine. She was being ridiculous. Hae-sung was her employer, nothing more. He had no claim on her personal life, no right to approve or disapprove of who she dated. So why did accepting Jake's invitation feel like betrayal? Hae-sung saw the flowers the moment he stepped off the elevator that evening. They dominated the entrance, impossible to miss. White roses arranged with obvious romantic intent. He stopped walking, every muscle in his body going rigid. Someone had sent Cassidy flowers. Expensive flowers. Romantic flowers. White roses meant new beginnings. His vision narrowed into a tunnel, the world reducing to those flowers and the implications they carried. Someone was pursuing her. Someone thought they had the right to pursue her. Someone was trying to take what was. He cut off that thought before it could fully form, but the damage was done. His hands had already curled into fists, his jaw already clenched so hard his teeth ached. "Jung-ho." His voice came out harder than he'd intended. His right-hand man appeared immediately, one look at Hae-sung's face, telling him everything he needed to know. "Who delivered these?" "I believe they were for Cassidy, sir. A personal matter." "I didn't ask who they were for. I asked who delivered them." Jung-ho's expression remained carefully neutral, but Hai-sung saw the calculation behind his eyes. 15 years they'd worked together and never had Jung-ho heard this tone. Raw, uncontrolled, dangerous. She mentioned an ex-boyfriend, Jung-ho said carefully. Said it was complicated, I didn't press for details. An ex-boyfriend. The words detonated in Hae-sung's brain. Someone from Cassidy's past, someone who'd touched her, kissed her, had rights to her that he'd denied himself for 8 agonizing months. Someone who thought they could walk back into her life with flowers and apologies and reclaim what they'd been stupid enough to walk away from. When did they arrive? Did you see her face? Did she smile? Boss, answer the question. Jung-ho took a breath. This morning. I didn't see her reaction, but she seemed uncertain. Maybe a little hopeful. Hopeful. Hae-sung turned away before Jung-ho could see his expression, before his right-hand man could witness just how far his legendary control had deteriorated. Find out his name. I want to know who he is, where he works, where he lives. Sir, with respect, this is getting... Did I ask for your opinion? The words came out lethal. Find out. Everything. By morning. Jung-ho hesitated. Actual visible hesitation. And that felt like insubordination. Like betrayal. But he finally nodded and left, and Ha-sung was alone with the flowers. He should destroy them, should throw them off the balcony and watch them shatter 40 floors below. Should make it clear that no one sent romantic gestures to someone under his protection. Instead, he walked past them to his study and poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey, downing it in one burning swallow. This was insane. Absolutely insane. Cassidy could date whoever she wanted, could marry a different man every month if it pleased her. She wasn't his, had never been his, would never be his, because men like him didn't get to keep soft things. They only destroyed them. But the image of her smiling at another man, being hopeful about another man, made him want to burn Seoul to the ground. 2 days later? Cassidy asked for Saturday afternoon off. Personal appointment, she said, not quite meeting his eyes. I'll make up the hours next week if you need me to. Hae-sung's hand tightened around his whiskey glass. Personal appointment. Yes, sir. Will this become a regular occurrence? She finally looked at him, confusion evident in her expression. I don't think so. I just need a few hours on Saturday afternoon. Fine. Take the day. He forced the words out evenly, professionally, even as every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to demand an explanation, to lock the doors and keep her here where she was safe from ex-boyfriends who didn't deserve a second chance. Thank you, Mr. Park. She left, and Hae-sung sat alone in his study, staring at nothing. Saturday afternoon, 2 p.m. at the cafe on Gangnam. Most likely, that's where Seoul's young professionals went for romantic reunions. He'd bet his entire empire that her personal appointment involved white roses and a man who was about to discover what happened to people who touched things that belonged to Hae-sung Park. The glass cracked in his grip. He looked down to find blood welling from his palm, mixing with the whiskey. He didn't feel the pain, didn't feel anything except the cold certainty settling in his bones. That night, he made a call. His head of intelligence answered on the first ring, because everyone answered on the first ring when Hae-sung called. I need you to find out everything about someone named Jake, ex-boyfriend of Cassidy Michiel. I want his entire life on my desk by morning. Employment history, financial records, criminal background, past relationships, current residence, everything. May I ask the purpose, sir? No. He ended the call and poured another drink, the burn doing nothing to dull the feeling in his chest. This was wrong. Possessive and controlling and completely inappropriate for an employer. But Cassidy was meeting with her ex on Saturday. Was hopeful about her ex on Saturday. And there was no force on earth that would stop Hae-sung from knowing everything about the man who thought he deserved a second chance. The ice in his glass cracked again. Or maybe it was the glass itself, he couldn't tell anymore. His palm was bleeding steadily now, blood dripping onto his desk, but he didn't move to stop it. Somewhere in the dark of his mind, a decision crystallized. Whatever Jake wanted, whatever promises he planned to make. Whatever future he thought he could build with Cassidy, he wouldn't get the chance. Saturday came and went. Cassidy met Jake at the cafe on Gangnam, sat across from him in a window booth, and listened to 2 years' worth of apologies wrapped in charm. He'd changed, he said, grown up, realized what he'd lost. The dress and flowers were just the beginning. He wanted her back, wanted to prove he deserved a second chance. She'd listened to every word and felt nothing. No, that wasn't quite true. She'd felt something, but it wasn't the flutter of rekindled romance or the warmth of forgiveness. It was comparison. Every smile Jake gave her fell flat against the memory of Hae-sung's rare, genuine expressions. Every touch of Jake's hand across the table felt wrong compared to the electric spark of fingers brushing over tea at 3 a.m. Jake had talked about their future, and all Cassidy could think about was a man who watched her like she was the only thing in his world worth seeing. She'd left the cafe confused, emotional, and completely uncertain about what any of it meant. Now, stepping off the elevator into Hae-sung's penthouse, she knew something was wrong immediately. The lights were dimmed. The space felt charged, dangerous, like the air before a lightning strike. And Hae-sung stood by the windows alone, his silhouette razor-sharp against the city glow. He didn't turn when she entered, didn't acknowledge her at all. But she felt his awareness of her like a physical force, pressing against her skin. "You're early," she said, trying for normalcy. "I wasn't expecting you until—" "How was your date?" The question cut through the air like a blade. Not, "How was your appointment?" or, "Did you have a nice afternoon?" Date. The word dripped with venom, with barely restrained violence, and Cassidy's breath caught. He still hadn't turned around. She could see his reflection in the window, jaw clenched, hands fisted at his sides, every line of his body screaming tension. "It wasn't a date," she said carefully. "It was just coffee. Jake wanted to talk about—" "Jake?" He said the name like it tasted of poison. And what did Jake want to talk about? Cassidy's heart hammered against her ribs. She should leave, should recognize the danger in his tone and retreat, but something kept her rooted to the spot, some instinct that said running now would break something irreparable. "He wants to reconcile," she admitted. "He said he'd changed, that he regretted leaving, that—" Hae-sung turned, and Cassidy's words died in her throat. His eyes were black and wild, his control shattered so completely she could see the cracks spiderwebbing across his expression. He moved toward her and she took an instinctive step back, then another. Her spine hit the wall and still he came, closing the distance until she could feel the heat radiating off him. He didn't touch her, didn't need to. His presence alone pinned her in place. "And what did you say?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute focus. "When this man who abandoned you suddenly wanted you back, what did you tell him?" "I said I needed time to think," Cassidy breathed, "that I was confused." His hand slammed into the wall beside her head and she flinched, not from fear, from the raw emotion bleeding through every inch of him. He was close enough now that she could see the muscle ticking in his jaw, could smell his cologne mixed with whiskey, could feel his chest rising and falling with barely controlled breaths. "Confused," he repeated, the word breaking on his tongue. "You're confused about a man who threw you away like you were nothing. That's not fair." "You want to know what's not fair?" He leaned closer, and Cassidy's breath stopped entirely. "I wanted it to be me sending those flowers. I wanted to be the one sending you a dress, making you smile, having the right to touch you without it destroying everything I've built." The confession hit her like a physical blow. Cassidy stared at him, watching the careful mask he'd worn for 8 months crumble into dust. "I imagined you with him," Hae-sung continued, his voice raw and jagged, laughing, touching. "Looking at him, the way I've memorized you looking at everything else. And I wanted to burn the world down, wanted to find him and make him understand that some things, you, aren't his to reclaim. His free hand came up, hovering inches from her face but not quite touching, trembling. I tried to control it, this obsession, this need. I failed. Cassidy couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at this man who ruled an empire through fear and control, watching him fall apart in front of her. "Every night you leave, I count the hours until you return," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "Every man who looks at you, I imagine destroying. Every moment you're not here, I wonder where you are, who you're with, if you're safe. You've become the axis my world spins on, and I don't know how to stop it." He dropped his forehead to the wall beside her head, close enough that she felt his breath against her neck. "You're the only thing I can't control, Cassidy, and it's killing me." The words hung between them, raw and exposed. Cassidy's hands itched to touch him, to smooth away the tension in his shoulders, to pull him closer instead of away. But before she could move, before she could process what he'd just confessed, he straightened. The mask tried to reassemble itself, but the cracks were too deep. She could still see the chaos underneath. "You should quit," he said, his voice hollow. "Effective immediately. I'll provide severance, 6 months' salary, references, whatever you need." "What?" The word came out strangled. "You're firing me?" "I'm setting you free." He stepped back, putting distance between them that felt like miles. "Before I do something we'll both regret. Before my world swallows you whole." "Ha-sung." "Don't." He turned away, presenting her with rigid shoulders. "Just don't. Accept the offer. Leave. Find some normal man who can give you a normal life. Forget you ever worked for a monster." Cassidy stood frozen against the wall, her mind reeling. He'd just confessed. What? Obsession? Love? Something so intense it terrified him, and now he was throwing her out? "I'm not quitting," she heard herself say. He didn't turn around. "Then you're fired. You can't fire me for no reason. That's illegal, even for you." A sound escaped him. Maybe a laugh, maybe something darker. "Cassidy, I'm Korean mafia. Legality stopped being a concern for me long ago." "Then do it," she challenged, something reckless rising in her chest. "Call Jung-ho. Fire me officially. Look me in the eye and tell me to leave." The silence stretched, agonizing and electric. Finally, Hai-sung turned, and the devastation in his eyes nearly broke her. "Go home," he said quietly. "We'll discuss the details Monday." It wasn't a firing, wasn't a dismissal. It was a retreat, and they both knew it. Cassidy left before her courage failed, before she did something insane like refuse to go, but his words followed her all the way home. "Every night you leave, I count the hours until you return." She touched the wall where his hand had been, and wondered if she was strong enough to walk away from a man who'd just handed her his heart while begging her to run. Monday came, and Cassidy showed up for work. Hae-sung said nothing, just watched her step off the elevator with something bleak in his eyes before turning away. No mention of firing, no discussion of severance, just nothing. The Cold War had begun. 3 weeks passed in agonizing slow motion. Hae-sung became a ghost in his own penthouse, speaking only when absolutely necessary, avoiding eye contact, arranging his schedule so their paths crossed as little as possible. He brought in a supervisor, some efficient woman named Minji, who managed Cassidy's tasks, and reported back to him, creating a buffer between them. It was professional, appropriate, absolutely torturous. Cassidy threw herself into work, pretending she didn't notice how he left rooms when she entered them, pretending she didn't hear his voice late at night, rough and tired, talking to Jung-ho about things that had nothing to do with her, pretending her chest didn't ache every time she caught a glimpse of him looking more exhausted, more hollow, more like he was slowly disappearing from the inside out. And then the rumours started. He'd been seen at a charity gala with a stunning socialite, some heiress with perfect hair and a pedigree that stretched back generations. The photos showed them together, his hand at the small of her back, her smile brilliant and cultured. Everything Cassidy wasn't. The images appeared on her phone courtesy of well-meaning friends who thought she should know. She stared at them until her eyes burned, telling herself it didn't matter, telling herself she had no claim on him, lying to herself with every breath. Jake kept texting, kept calling, showed up at her apartment twice. All charm and persistence. She ignored him, too emotionally raw to deal with whatever game he was playing. But his presence was a constant reminder that she'd agreed to think about reconciliation, back when she'd still believed that was what she wanted, before Ha-sung had pinned her against a wall and confessed he was obsessed with her. The breaking point came on a Friday evening. Cassidy was restocking supplies in the study when she heard Ha-sung's voice through the partially open door. He was on the phone, speaking in Korean, but certain words cut through crystal clear. Marriage, arrangement, business purposes, family expectations. Her hands stilled on the shelf. The socialite from the photos. It wasn't just rumor. He was actually considering a marriage arrangement. The kind of strategic union that powerful families made to consolidate power, secure alliances, maintain empires. The kind that had nothing to do with love. Something inside Cassidy snapped. 3 weeks of silence, of distance, of watching him slowly destroy himself while pushing her away. It was too much. Before she could second-guess herself, she pushed open the study door. Hae-sung looked up, surprise flickering across his features before the mask fell. He said something sharp in Korean and ended the call. "You need something." His voice was ice. "If you wanted me gone, you should have fired me." The words came out steadier than she felt. "This cruelty is beneath you." He stood slowly, something dangerous entering his expression. Cruelty? You think maintaining professional distance is cruel? I think torturing yourself while pretending it's for my benefit is cruel, she shot back. I think arranging a marriage to someone you don't love while telling yourself it's for business is cruel. I think destroying us both instead of admitting what you feel is the cruelest thing you've ever done. Us? The word exploded from him. There is no us, Cassidy. There can't be. Do you understand what my life is? What I am? Every person who gets close to me becomes a target, a liability, a weapon my enemies can use. So you'll marry some socialite who means nothing instead. Yes. He moved around the desk, and she saw the fractures in his control. Because she knows the rules, she understands the game. She won't expect love or safety or any of the things you deserve. What about what you deserve? The question stopped him cold. Cassidy pressed forward, her voice shaking. You think I don't know what you are, what your world is. I've worked here for 8 months. I've seen the violence, the danger, the darkness, and I'm still here. I keep showing up. What does that tell you? That you're naive, he said, but his voice had lost its edge. That you don't understand. That I'm choosing you anyway. The confession burst from her, raw and honest. Despite the danger, despite everything, I'm choosing you, and you're too scared to let me. Hae-sung's face went through a dozen emotions in rapid succession: shock, hope, fear, longing. Finally, he settled on something that looked like devastation. Cruelty is keeping you here. In my world, everyone I love ends up destroyed. I'm trying to save you, Cassidy, even if it kills me. Then let it kill you, she said softly, because this half-life isn't protecting either of us. She turned and walked away before he could respond, before she could see whether her words had landed or simply wounded them both further. Behind her, she heard something crash, glass shattering against a wall. Then silence. The Cold War continued, but the cracks were showing. And Cassidy couldn't shake the feeling that one more push would either save them or destroy everything. She had no idea the push was about to come from the person she least expected. Jake showed up at the penthouse on a Tuesday evening, all charm and expensive cologne, claiming he needed to see Cassidy urgently. Security called up, and something in their tone made her stomach drop. She told them to send him away. He came anyway. Cassidy met him in the lobby, anger overriding caution. "How did you get up here?" I said. "I need to talk to you." His charm had cracks in it now, desperation showing through. "It's important. Life and death. Important. Jake, I told you I needed space. Is it true?" He grabbed her arm, his grip too tight. "You're working for Haesung Park? The Haesung Park?" Cold realization washed over her. "How do you know who I work for?" "Everyone knows who he is, Cassie. He's not exactly subtle." Jake's expression shifted into something she didn't recognize. "I need you to introduce me. To him. To his business contacts." The words hit her like a slap. "What? Come on, it's perfect. You work for him, he obviously trusts you. Just one introduction. I've got this investment opportunity, and if I could just talk to—" "You want me to pimp out my employer's contacts?" Cassidy jerked her arm free, disgust rising in her throat. "That's why you came back? That's why you sent flowers and wanted to reconcile?" Jake had the decency to look guilty for half a second before the mask came back. "Don't be dramatic. I'm just asking for a favor. You owe me that much after—" "I owe you nothing." The pieces were falling into place now, ugly and obvious. "You found out where I worked and saw an opportunity. This was never about wanting me back. Cassie, listen. Get out. You don't understand. I'm in trouble, real trouble. I owe money to people who—" He cut himself off, but the damage was done. Cassidy went very still. "What people, Jake?" "It doesn't matter. Just introduce me to Park, and everything will be fine. I'll get the investment, pay off my debts, and we can—" "Leave." The voice came from behind Cassidy, cold and absolutely lethal. She spun to find Haesung stepping out of the elevator, Jung-ho at his side. "Before I have security remove you in pieces." Jake paled, but desperation made him stupid. "Mr. Park, perfect. I was hoping to discuss a business opportunity." "I know exactly what you want to discuss." Haesung moved forward and Jake stumbled back. "You're drowning in debt to the Choi organization. $250,000 in gambling debts. You found out Cassidy works for me and saw a way out." Horror washed through Cassidy. Jake's face confirmed everything. "The dress and flowers were reconnaissance," Haesung continued, his voice clinical. "You wanted to know if you still had influence over her. When she agreed to coffee, you thought you had a chance. But you miscalculated, Jake. Badly. I just need one introduction. You used her." Each word was a death sentence. "Lied to her. Came back into her life solely to manipulate her into getting you access to my world. And you thought, what? That I wouldn't find out?" Jake looked between them, finally recognizing the danger he'd walked into. "This isn't over. If you don't help me, I'll tell the Choi organization about her. They'd love to know about your weakness." He never finished the sentence. Haesung had his phone out, dialing with terrifying calm. "Yes. The Choi situation we discussed. Execute it. All of it." He hung up and turned back to Jake. "Your debts are now mine. I've purchased them from the Choi organization, and rather than collect, I'm going to make them disappear. Along with you." "What?" "You have 12 hours to leave Seoul. If you ever contact Cassidy again, if you even think her name, I'll call in those debts plus interest. Do you understand?" Jake fled. Cassidy stood frozen watching him go, feeling numb. All of it. The dress, the flowers, the apologies, the promise of change, had been manipulation. She'd almost fallen for it. Almost let herself believe people could change that fundamentally. "Cassidy, I compared every man to you." The words burst from her before she could stop them. She turned to face Haesung, everything she'd been holding back rushing out. Every single one, even before I understood what I felt. They all fell short. His expression cracked. Vulnerability flooding through. "The night you destroyed that man who hurt me, that's when I knew," she continued. "Not because I wanted violence, but because I saw what it cost you. Saw that you'd cross any line to keep me safe, even ones that terrified you." "Cassidy, don't—" "You think you're protecting me by pushing me away," she said, her voice breaking. "But you're the only one who makes me feel safe, the only one who sees me, the only one I want." Hae-sung closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were filled with something raw and desperate. "If I let myself have you, I'll never let go. You'll become the center of everything, the one thing my enemies can use to destroy me." "Then they'll have to destroy me first." She stepped closer. "I'm not your weakness, Hae-sung. I'm your strength." For a moment, the world held its breath. Then, Hae-sung moved, crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and kissed her. Finally, desperately. His hands framed her face like she was something precious and breakable, and his lips moved against hers with the intensity of 8 months of restraint shattering. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, both of them breathing hard. "Don't ever put yourself at risk for me again," he whispered. "Then stop giving me reasons to," she whispered back. His laugh was shaky, disbelieving. "You have no idea what you've just signed up for." "Then show me." He kissed her again, and this time, neither of them pulled away. 6 months later, Cassidy stepped out of a limousine wearing crimson silk, and the world stopped. The charity gala glittered with Seoul's elite, politicians, business magnates, old money families who controlled the city from mahogany offices and private clubs. This was the same event where Hae-sung had been photographed with the socialite, back when he'd been trying to convince himself he could walk away. Now he stood at the entrance waiting for her, devastating in a black tuxedo, his eyes tracking her like she was the only person in the universe. Everything had changed. Slowly, deliberately, Hae-sung had been extracting himself from the darkest parts of his empire. Legitimate businesses replaced shadow operations. Charitable foundations laundered his reputation instead of money. It was a careful dance, dangerous and complex, but he was doing it. For her. "You're late," he said as she reached him, but his smile was warm. "Traffic." She touched his lapel, adjusting his tie unnecessarily. "Or maybe I wanted to make an entrance." "You succeeded." His hand settled at the small of her back, warm and possessive. "Ready?" "For what?" "To watch me destroy my reputation for you." Before she could ask what he meant, they entered the ballroom. Conversations died as people recognized Hae-sung Park, walking in with a woman who definitely wasn't the carefully vetted socialite everyone expected. Whispers rippled through the crowd, curiosity and calculation. Hae-sung led her to the center of the room, positioned them where everyone could see, and raised his voice just enough to carry. "For those who don't know, this is Cassidy, the woman I love, the only one who ever mattered." The silence was absolute. Cassidy's breath stopped in her chest. In a world where power was built on fear and control, where showing weakness meant death, Ha-sung Park had just publicly claimed her, had painted a target on both their backs. "You just destroyed your advantage," she whispered, stunned. "Everyone knows now. Your enemies. Will have to go through me to reach you." He pulled her closer, his eyes fierce. "Let them try." "Hae-sung, I spent months trying to protect you by pushing you away," he said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "All I did was make us both miserable. So yes, I'm claiming you, publicly. Let Seoul know that touching you means war." Cassidy felt tears prick her eyes. This man, this terrifying, powerful, dangerous man, had just made himself vulnerable for her, had chosen love over safety, over strategy, over everything his world valued. "We'll face it together," he promised, "whatever comes." "Together," she agreed. The orchestra started playing, and Hae-sung led her onto the dance floor. The crowd watched, some scandalized, some envious, all transfixed. But Cassidy only saw him, the man who'd spent 8 months fighting an obsession before finally surrendering to it. "I have something for you," he murmured as they swayed. "Later, when we're alone. Should I be nervous? Maybe." His smile turned wicked. "It's red." Cassidy's breath caught. Later, in the privacy of his penthouse, he presented her with a box. Inside was a dress, crimson silk, identical in style to the one that had started everything 8 months ago. But this one had a note. This one is from me. Only me. Always me. H. She looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that still stole her breath. The question was never about the dress, he said quietly. It was about whether you'd ever be mine. Whether I deserved you. Whether I could keep you safe while keeping you. And now? Now I know the answers. He pulled her close, his lips brushing her temple. You were always mine. I'll never deserve you. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving I can give you both. Cassidy kissed him, the dress forgotten, and knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Love wasn't safe. It wasn't easy. But with this man, this complicated, obsessive, devoted man, it was real. And that was worth every risk. Thank you for watching this story unfold. If Haesung and Cassidy's journey resonated with you, if you felt every moment of tension, every confession, every dangerous choice, then I've done my job. This is what happens when obsession meets devotion, when power meets vulnerability, when two people choose each other despite every reason not to. If you want more stories like this, tales of forbidden love, dangerous men, and the women who refuse to run, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling me whose POV you connected with more, Haesung's tortured restraint or Cassidy's fearless choice. And if this story kept you watching until the end, share it with someone who loves intense romance. Let's build a community of people who understand that the best love stories aren't safe. They're worth it. Until next time, remember, the right person will burn their whole world down just to keep you warm. Subscribe, like and comment.